I went to the Sphere, a few months ago. Many of you were probably there too. Las Vegas. Las Vegas is such a strange place, but the Sphere is wonderful. And I paid for extra tickets to go see Postcards from Earth. It was a matinee, and in the Sphere, prior to the night when the Dead were playing. And because we got VIP tickets, we got to talk to a robot. The robot's name's Aura, and it was touted as the most advanced AI robot in existence. And so about 20 or 30 of us could ask Aura, the robot, questions. And I posed this question at the Synbio Beta conference at the 2,000 nerds, and I got an award from them. And I posed this question, and I couldn't get a good answer. All these nerdy scientists using artificial intelligence and genomics, and I'm kind of a natural, kind of guy. And I came up to Aura, and after everybody was asking Aura like baseball scores and all this data mining, really dumb shit, frankly. And so I posed Aura this question. Given that humans invented artificial intelligence, and given that the humans that invented artificial intelligence are here today through a long lineage of random acts of kindness. Think about that. Go back to your own ancestry. Dozens, hundreds, maybe thousands of times your ancestry is populated by these random acts of kindness where a stranger reached out a hand. We're not expecting to get anything in return, but out of kindness and generosity and compassion and love, relationships formed. Those are your grandparents, in many cases. So I said to Aura, given the fact that humans are here today and invented artificial intelligence, and we are here today through random acts of kindness, how will artificial intelligence continue to perpetuate this origin story, which is the basis of your existence? And surprisingly, Aura took a really long time. I was fascinated by really how long Aura took to respond. And then Aura looked at me and said, why would humans do that? It's far more efficient to have a transactional relationship where you expect a return on anything that you do. Boom. Blew my friggin' mind and scared the shit out of me. So, I've spoken now to thousands of people, and I have a call to action to all of you tonight. After this talk, ask ChatGPT, Grok, Gemini, Perplexity, all these artificial intelligence platforms, the same question, but preface it with that humans are here today because of random acts of kindness, and artificial intelligence is descendant. How will you continue to perpetuate artificial intelligence, random acts of kindness, as an important part of your heritage and our destiny? And I can tell you, speaking to thousands of people just in the past few months, and reciting this story, it's changed. We are at this nascent period of artificial intelligence that we can steer this. It's important that we're not in the back seat, we're in the front seat. So I encourage all of you, this is our opportunity to train artificial intelligence, the importance of random acts of kindness. And indeed, the Dead community, the Kesey family, the Provende Alliance, so many of us here today, we are here celebrating random acts of kindness. So, hey folks, bless their hearts. Chuck and Sue Kesey, we honor, we thank you. We have so much deep respect for you. Thank you to the Kesey family for bringing this moment possible that we all share today. I'm sure all of us have been affected directly or indirectly by the Kesey family. So a big shout out to you, Chuck and Sue. You're with us forever. I'm going to cover mushrooms, mostly psilocybin mushrooms. But I'm going to segue into immunity, and I'm going to conclude this talk with something I think truly is paradigm shifting. And I think today we have a crisis in creativity. And my experience with psilocybin mushrooms has made me, I think, more spiritual, more intelligent, and more creative. And I think this is a paradigm shift that we can all help facilitate. I commissioned this artist because I realized that all habitats are infused with mycelium. You see the mycelium underground, many of you know, hundreds of miles under a single footstep, more than 5 to 10 miles of mycelium in a cubic inch of soil. And the mushrooms then appear, and most of them are very fragile and quick to decompose. They attract insects. They attract mycovores, animals, to consume them. So it's the mycelial networks that are resident, that are part of the intelligence of nature. They're the construct of the food webs. They're everywhere. And any of you who have not seen mycelium, go outside tomorrow and turn over a stick or a log. It's amazing. These membranes are all around us all the time. And I present to you the concept that they're listening. We are descendants of fungi. 650 million years ago, fungi gave birth to Animalia. We are animals. And so when we look at these fungal networks, we're looking at the deep intelligence of nature. The mycelium can be generated by taking a tissue culture or generating spores. That was a 5-day sequence of the growth of Psilocybe cubensis. It's exponential expansion of mycelial mass. The endpoints of the mycelium is constantly splitting and forking. This is growing 2-dimensionally, but they grow 3-dimensionally in nature. So, because I spent a lot of time with microscopes, and with the scanning electron microscope in particular, it really struck me that the organization of mycelial networks also conforms to the organization of neurons in our brain, of the strings of galaxies, of dark matter in the universe, of what eventually became the computer internet. These are all repetitions of previously proven evolutionary successful models. Networks survive better than individuals. I believe matter begets life, life becomes strings, strings fork, they refork, mosaics of mycelial mats form, they invite cooperating organisms prebiotically, they repel antagonistic organisms, they create guilds of cooperating communities that build the ecosystems and nutrient cycles that give livelihood to the plants, that surge up, that create fruits and the berries and the detritus to feed the mycelial networks. We are all interrelated. We're all living in the mycoverse, governed by these mycelial networks. I want to share with you something I found from the vault this past year. I hadn't seen this in decades. But this is sort of my origin story. Back in 1984, I started my business in 1980. I packed 30,000 boxes without a single employee. It was very, very tough times, folks. Many of you have gone through similar times. I'm not the only one. But I found this, and I just wanted to share it because I think my son is so cute. So here he is.
Come on. Dad, what are you doing, Dad?
We have to have production in order to sustain the research without refinancing. And so that's why we have both a production, our focus in the future and the present is research in a major way.
Pigs.
I couldn't slaughter my pigs, they were my friends. What do you do? So I had a small farm, a small family, and it's been quite the journey. I want to thank my 132 employees. I still remain independent. It's not just me, it's a whole community of people that are tribute to my mentors, Dr. Michael Bugh, Kit Skates, Daniel Stuntz, and Alexander Smith. These are fantastic individuals and mycologists. They showered me with kindness when I was a long-haired hippie. And I also want to give recognition to my father, my mother, my brother John, who unfortunately passed away way too early. John went to Yale University, and on break he would go to Mexico and Colombia on one vacation. He came back with amazing stories of psilocybin mushrooms. I was the youngest one in my family. I was just fascinated by his stories and all too eager. I adored my older brother. He was an intellectual giant. And so John, inspired me, and I kind of picked up the torch from him, and I just did a deep dive into the subject of psilocybin mushrooms. So here's John eating psilocybe singulancida, Liberty Cap. And in 1978, 47 years ago, I published my first book when I was 23 years of age on psilocybe mushrooms. So it has been a lifelong journey. And this book, I'm still very proud of it. It talked about the close lookalikes, etc. But I'm really proud, after 47 years, to have just recently published a new book, Psilocybin Mushrooms in Their Natural Habitat. This book, I think, is extremely important for many, many reasons. But I want you to know that I dedicated this book to three great mycologists, three women, Maria Sabina, Tina Wasson, and Kit Skates. Women do not get enough recognition for the doors that they have opened for us to walk through. And we need to let women lead. It's time for men to start stepping back. But these women were mycologists. Maria Sabina, I suggest to you, is a mycologist. She was never considered herself to be a shaman. She was the great Mazatec healer, Asabia. I just came back from Maria Sabina's hometown, Huautla de Jimenez in Oaxaca, and met her inner circle of trusted friends, students. I just went through a Mazatec mushroom velada with one of her disciples, 85 years of age. She doesn't even speak Spanish. It was a profound experience. It's a very personal experience. I've learned a lot of lessons. But the lessons that we share with the Mazatecs and so many other people is to share the power of psilocybin mushrooms. It creates a unanimity of being, of consciousness. It puts us all together, working together, respecting nature, honoring all organisms on this planet. We're one giant continuum. And the coincidences that I mentioned with random acts of kindness, we are assemblies of molecules that have converged in this moment at this time, in the space-time continuum. It's an extraordinary coincidence that we share this existence at this moment. It's a precious opportunity. It's a precious responsibility. What are we going to do with it? So I'll stop proselytizing for a minute. So we did a series of mushroom conferences. Michael Bugh had a TDA license when I was 21, 22 years of age. I was listed on the license as well. So back in those times that people may not understand, we were worried that any moment the feds were going to break down the doors and arrest us all. But we had this Drug Enforcement Administration license to possess and cultivate psilocybin mushrooms. So I took that responsibility very seriously. I adopted long ago an adage, nature provides, I don't. When my father was in his end of his life, in his late 70s, he would never smoke pot. He goes, Paul, you know about these psilocybin mushrooms. I want to take some. I went, wow, Dad, really? And then I was faced with a conundrum because his wife, Mona, I said, well, Mona, will you take psilocybin mushrooms with us? The three of us can do it together. She goes, absolutely not. She was a former Catholic nun. And so I turned my dad down. I said, Dad, I can't take you on this journey, shatter your life the view of the world that you have, and then leave tomorrow, I'd be abandoning you. It's not responsible. Alexander Smith, the father of American mycology, asked me the same thing. And I asked Helen, his wife, will you, Helen, take psilocybin mushrooms? Alexander Smith, the father of American mycology, who published monographs on the genus Psilocybe in Aspen, Colorado, and she said no. And I turned down Alexander Smith. Two huge figures in my life. Because the experience of those who have taken psilocybin mushrooms, we take these as serious sacraments. These are serious medicines. It's so important that you're there for people to help them process. So I want to impart that to you because I understand why young people like, finding their identity, raves, and they're exploring, they're pushing the envelope. But I'm so happy that so many times younger people have come up to me and they said their first experience was at a rave with psilocybin mushrooms. I said, well, what happened? What did you do? He says, I left the rave. I went out into the desert. I laid underneath the stars. I welcomed the universe, That's cool, Okay, let's go forward. I published numerous books with Terrence McKenna here. This is his book with Dennis McKenna, Psilocybin Mushrooms, Psilocybin Mushroom Magic Mushroom Growers Guide. This sort of just opened up the floodgates of the cultivation of Psilocybe cubensis. We did conferences for 20, 25, 30 years, the Mycomedia conferences, some of them at Brighton Bush Hot Springs. The last big one we did was the 1999 Millennium Mushroom Conference. Because I knew the psychedelic scientists, then I knew the merry pranksters, I realized I had this Venn intersection. I knew both groups here. Let's bring them together. So we did the Millennium Mushroom Conference, 1999. Kesey and the pranksters came. Mountain Girl was there, and I hope she's in the audience tonight. And so many other great friends, Ken Babbs, George Walker, Mystery, so many great people there. And then Andy Weil, Sasha Shulgin, Ann Shulgin, Gary Winkoff, and some really serious physicians who are interested in the medicinal properties and the psychotherapeutic properties of psilocybin. We had one massive party. I lost control of the conference, and I told we had a witch's brew with about 20 species of psilocybin mushrooms. It was crazy. It was wonderful. It was so pagan. It was so cool. It was on Halloween, so everyone dressed up in animal uniforms. So that was kind of cool. But history was made, and there's a film coming out on this event. But let's look at psilocybe mushrooms. There's about 220 species. Most of the psilocybin mushrooms are in the genus Psilocybe. They have purple-brown spores, gill mushrooms. And the general rule, if the mushroom bruises bluish, has purple-brown spores, it's a gilled mushroom, it's likely to be a psilocybin mushroom. It's a gilled mushroom that bruises bluish, not a bolete, let's be careful about that. A gilled mushroom that bruises bluish, has purple-brown spores, the black spores, is very likely to be a psilocybin mushroom. My book shows a few exceptions, but the exceptions are not dangerous. But where and why do we have so many psilocybin mushrooms? Well, we funded some research at Utah State University with Bryn Detlinger on genomic analysis, looking at molecular clock data. And they published this, and it was a surprise to everyone. The first genomic expression of psilocybin gene sequences could be backtracked and dated to about 65 million years ago. Think about it. 65 million years ago. These are ancient organisms. These are elders. Long before we had our forms, they had theirs. A more recent article just came out, and a whole different gene sequence, totally unrelated, spontaneously now also has coded for the production of psilocybin in the genus Psilocybe, corallina. So this is really interesting, that these species are producing this incredible compound that substitutes for serotonin and docks with your brain receptors and becomes a neurotransmitter temporarily. So looking at the history of the collection of herbarium samples of psilocybe mushrooms all over the world, from 1800 further, they're spread all over the world. Now, just because there's not dots on the map doesn't mean that they don't grow there. It just means that we don't have a record of a mycologist or a botanist depositing them in a library. So I started doing a deep dive about the cultural uses of psilocybin mushrooms. And I first focused on the old world in my book, and then we go to the new world. The old world is speculative because we have echoes from the archaeological record. The one that many of you have seen is in southern Algeria, the bee man, quote unquote, 7,000 years ago, associated with the aurochs, Bos taurus, the predecessor to our current longhorn cattle. And many of you know that throughout the world, psilocybin mushrooms, if they rot so quickly, if you put them in honey, they'll be preserved and also ferments. And so perhaps this is a message from thousands of years ago of the psilocybin mushrooms being preserved in honey and psychoactive meads, perhaps. In the upper one on the right, the thoughts or spores of dancing people holding the mushrooms as they're moving forward. Artists are trying to communicate a language that's immemorial. And how do you construct the images that will convey the significance of your experience? I think this artist did a very good job. We go north, and also 6,000 years ago, and there's Bos taurus again on cave art, and this was putatively suggested to be Psilocybe hispanica that grows in Spain. 2 years ago, I went to Egypt, and as the tourists were taken inside the temples, we went to 10 temples along the Nile. As the tourists went in the temples, my partner and I, we went mushroom hunting. And we found mushroom images all over the temples. And so some of them are pretty convincing. This is the goddess Hathor from the Dendera temple. Desertification now is encroached on the Nile. This temple area gets 0 to 3 millimeters of rain a year. Climate change has totally altered the ecosystem there. The Nile was the breadbasket of the world, it's known as that. But desertification is encroached. So it shouldn't be a surprise that Egyptologists today, disconnected from the ecosystem of the art that they're looking at on the temples from thousands of years ago, would not make the connection. But this mycologist did, Abzine, a good friend. He published a short article on Dendera Temple, and the goddess Hathor, the goddess of cosmetics, the goddess of the cow. And he suggested that these vessels could be Psilocybe cubensis. Well, they certainly look like Psilocybe cubensis. All of us who grow mushrooms know that if you have ports in a pot or holes in a bag, the mushrooms will come out through those ports. They're seeking air, they're seeking light, and so it's natural for mushrooms to form. And phenotypically, they look very similar. But there's this common reoccurrence with the blue lotus that's circled above. And so you look at the blue lotus. Where does the blue lotus grow? It grows in ponds. Where do cows go to drink water? Ponds. Cows then defecate. Psilocybes come up out of the manure. The mushrooms are blue, turn blue, but they're golden in color. Gold and blue are considered sacred colors in the Egyptology. The blue lotus, the flower that closes at night, opens in the morning. It's the death-birth cycle. So inevitably, of course, they would be finding these at the same time. So we looked further, and then we found more and more and more, literally dozens of these. When I showed it to an Egyptologist, he says, "No, don't be foolish. They're not mushrooms. They're shovels." Okay. Dude, the shovels would be upside down. They would have a longer stem, but that's an example of being out of context. So there's a movement called re-indigenization, where the Egyptian alchemists, indigenous Egyptians that I've met, are rediscovering that which their ancestors, they believe, were practicing. They're using now blue lotus extract combined with Psilocybe cubensis. And they're re-ritualizing and rediscovering, they think that's part of their heritage. So that's in Egypt. That's Northern Africa. Let's go to Southern Africa. Just in this past year and a half, 2 years, a new psilocybe mushroom has been named by scientists called psilocybe maluti in the Lesotho province. But it's Lesotho people. They have a poetry and stories of using this mushrooms that goes back at least 100 years, probably several hundred years, documented. So in southern Africa, psilocybin mushrooms are being used by indigenous people. And psilocybe mushrooms, in this case psilocybe cubensis, and another related species, it grows on elephant dung, hippopotamus dung, zebra dung, of course on cattle. So lots of these coprophilic species produce psilocybe mushrooms. We go to India, and an extraordinary relief here, showing taxonomically accurate. And when you give a psilocybin mushroom to somebody else, ritualistically, it's présente, look at this. You give it with honor and respect. And so it's very interesting to me that you have that same sort of présente, hand gesture. And again, they're taxonomically accurate. I go to the Roslin Temple in Scotland. More than 115 images of Green Man, only 10 images of Christ. And there's one, and the Green Man images, when you turn them upside down, you can see their mushrooms are incorporated into his face. But I found this one where the person looked like they're speaking with mushrooms that are cuspidate. Again, phenotypically and taxonomically accurate. I come from a Celtic and a Germanic heritage. I went to Stonehenge a year and a half ago, on September 20th of the past year. And this hearth, which is in the British Museum, is from about 2,000 years ago. And the hearths back then, they have two of these, but big logs on it to keep the house warm. And it looks like it could be psilocybe mushrooms. But all around Stonehenge, psilocybe and McDonald Theater grows. I went to Stonehenge last September, September 20th, before this last one, and they were doing a druid ceremony in the center, and the word got out, and the druids invited me, the priest invited me to the center of Stonehenge. Yeah. And my family is from the House of Asher, which is localized in this area, so I feel like it was a homecoming for me. And they brought me into the center of Stonehenge and said, "We anoint you as a fellow wizard." And I thought, I'm no wizard, dude. But that's really a nice thing to say, And it's like, this is the examples of some of the examples. So we go to the New World, the Americas, and we do have a very good documentation. A priest Sailogun recorded the ritualistic use of psilocybe mushrooms. And around 1529, interestingly in Bavaria, in 1516, just about the same time, the Bavarian Beer Purity Act specifically banned mushrooms from being in beer. That's interesting. At this time in the 1500s, the average lifespan was 35 years of age. You had children, you had a partner, they died. The importance of recoupling was really important for survival. So my Germanic ancestors would practice rituals in the forests and find a new partner, perhaps, if they were lucky, because that's just what you have to do to survive. We were in Oaxaca City, and then a friend of mine, Joe Torrey from Harvard, found this cross. At the base of the cross is a basket, and there's 3 mushrooms coming out. Created a huge controversy. No, they're spikes. Well, there are not spikes, folks. Number 1, you don't collect spikes in a basket, you collect mushrooms in a basket. Number 2, the spikes' heads are too big. Number 3, the spikes would be black if they're made of iron, or brown if they're made of wood, or black if they're burned. And spikes are not joined at the base. And moreover, those of us who collect mushrooms know the mushrooms can come up and reorient themselves and, in order to release spores. Well, that's what we see here. Now, 2 things can be true. But very interesting, in this church, built in the 1500s, a few decades after the arrival of the invader, Cortez. And so this is called syncretism, is when an indigenous culture adopts the trappings, the belief systems perhaps, of an invading culture in order to survive. And so when we go to Maria Sabina's rituals, in the ritual that I participated in, Christos, Virgin Mary, the saints were all being heralded in Mazatec. And they were smoking tobacco and singing. That's not my tradition, but that's the Mazatec tradition of today. And the Mazatecs use several species, Zapaticorum and cerulescens, landslide mushrooms in one case, one was associated with canes. But interestingly, Psilocybe cubensis is also used. And they call it San Isidro, and they all believe it came with the Spanish. It's not our preferred species. But because of cultivation, and because there's such an interest in this subject, they lack the psilocybin mushrooms during the large parts of the year. So the Western technology of being able to grow Psilocybe cubensis is now a supply line for the Mazatecs to continue their ritual. Well, think of that. It's a technology of in vitro propagation and growing mycelium to produce mushrooms that can help indigenous people to continue their ritual. Well, that speaks to something that I learned from Melissa Nelson, a dear friend of mine, who's half Chippewa and half Norwegian. She's a professor at San Francisco State in Indigenous Studies. And she introduced me to this concept, Paul, called two-eyed seeing. And Albert Moderna Marshall first came up with this in Eastern Canada when a mother came in with her indigenous child saying, why should I indoctrinate my indigenous child in a Western school? And they thought about this a long time, and they said, they came up with two-eyed seeing. This was one eye with indigenous wisdom, informed with the advantages of Western technology. Two eyes can see better than one. And so this is happening now all over the world. All traditions have benefited from advances in technology. I went to Anchorage, Alaska, fantastic indigenous museum there. At the very end of the exhibit, there's some Inuit that are shooting seals with snowmobile, a rifle, and binoculars. Well, that's another example of being able to use technologies to continue indigenous practices. But species and people migrate. This is Psilocybe cyanescens, one of my favorite species. And it was discovered in 1946 by Elsie Wakefield in the Kew Gardens in England. But it grows all over the Pacific Northwest. And I believe the most likely scenario is because the Kew Gardens brought in rhododendrons from Washington and Oregon, came with the mycelium. And so then it established itself in the Kew Gardens and then spread all over Europe. Now, to be fair, there's an article just published that said, no, it came from Australia. And then Australia, and then from the Kew Gardens, it got distributed. Listen, those of us who know cyanescens here, about every fourth truckload of alder chips, you get cyanescens. And then, thankfully, due to our naturalists, several collectors have found cyanescens in beaver holes, where beaver dens are. So beavers are making wood chips. I think it's the endophyte inside of these trees, of alders. Ulmus rubra was not brought into England until like 1778. So, but it's very tightly associated with red alder. It's a beautiful species. I love cyanescens. I had a journey with cyanescens recently. Not in the United States. I do have a DEA license in the United States. I was under a doctor's supervision, legally in a different country. But wow. The music was 6 feet away, and that was way too far for me to go. But look at this fruiting, folks. Alder chips. There's enough wavy caps, Psilocybe cyanescens for everybody in this room. So it was suggested that psilocybin is being produced by Psilocybe mushrooms in order to prevent insects from consuming this. It was published. I got all the authors saying, have you ever collected Psilocybe cubensis in the tropics? It's full of insect larvae. If this is an insecticide, it's not a very good one. And then we started to do an experiment. So we got 10 slugs. With Psilocybe cyanescens on the left, Stropharia rugosa annulata, the garden giant on the right, and we did a choice test. So here's the slugs going over, there's the garden giant, yum, 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 munch, munch, munch. I'll go over here and check out this Psilocybe. Not that interesting. here. I'll go back to the garden guy. I'll go over here. Oh, no. Hopping over. Not interested. Oh, what? Yeah. All right. Well, I'll go back to the garden giant. So, and thankfully, it's not just me, but other scientists now believe that this prevents slugs and snails from predating. When flies come to mushrooms, they're like buzz pollination. They're picking up spores, so that's cool. Spreads the spores. But slugs will eat the mushrooms when they're young before they sporulate. So it could be a survival mechanism. If that's true, why don't all mushrooms have psilocybin? You know, maybe we haven't waited long enough. But I'm a real strong advocate of the Provende Alliance. I hope all of you support the Provende Alliance because the Provende Alliance can give some fringe benefits. One of the benefits in 2007, when I went to the Provende Alliance, I parked my car at the Provende Alliance conference parking lot, opened up the door, and found psilocybe stuntii. Now, I'm not going to guarantee that you go to the Provende Alliance you're going to find psilocybe stuntii, but make note of it. But coincident with psilocybe mushrooms growing in wood chips are deadly Gallerana marginata. Two species here, stuntii and marginata, touching each other, they're so close. This one is deadly poisonous on the right. It's got rusty brown spores, doesn't bruise bluish, but look how close they are. If you were paranoid and worried that someone would see you, you could pick these mushrooms and end up, poisoning yourself. So I'm going to take you on 4 mushroom hunts. So here is one, and there's a dear friend in this audience that I want everyone to note for the historical record. Paxton Hogue. Paxton Hogue is here, I think, and Paxton and Lowe Hogue. Paxton is the one who brought this forward to us scientists. He was absolutely convinced this was a new species, and it's because of his commitment, saying, he championed this, and it eventually became named as psilocybe azurescens. So there's a shout out to you, Paxton, and here's a short little movie here.
Greetings, and meet psilocybe azurescens. Psilocybe azurescens is probably one of the most potent mushrooms in the world. It contains psilocybin and psilocin up to 2% of its dried mass. Now think of that. 2% of the dried mass of this mushroom are psychoactive crystals. Why would a mushroom produce so much? We don't know, but it certainly has attracted the interest of humans. The bluing that you see here is a bruising reaction. It's indicative of psilocin as it degrades. And the more bluing you see, the more psilocin there once was. Now, psilocybin dephosphorylates into psilocin, and when you ingest these mushrooms, psilocin becomes a serotonin agonist. It means that the psilocybin or the psilocin becomes a temporary neurotransmitter, opening up the floodgates of the senses. Now, this mushroom is sinuous. It's got a sinuous stem, which means it bends back and forth. It's bluing very, very strongly, and it has these very indicative spore color here on the annular zone. And the spore color is purple-brown, and the mushrooms are bluish. Those two features in combination pretty much de facto determines its psilocybe. Now look how bodacious the rhizomorphs are at the base of the stem. This is a large psilocybe, by far the largest one that I know that grows on wood chips in the Pacific Northwest. It is now a popular one to have in your backyard. It's just fun, it's just naturalized in the woods here. And this is a beautiful fruiting of them. And the psilocybes, many of the woodland psilocybes have this chestnut brown to caramel color. This one is unique in that it's got these umbos, and there is a broad umbo, and the cap is very circular. The bruising reactions just from impact of rain, perhaps. This mushroom is one of the most fascinating and interesting ones to grow. Those who choose to partake of this mushroom should be warned. These are exceptionally potent, and oftentimes they can cause temporary paralysis, loss of muscle control. So that is not a good thing. It seems that most people who boil this mushroom in hot water, those symptoms seem to be alleviated. But this is clearly a sacred species, and I love just personally touching it. This is not a mushroom that I enjoy eating. It's almost too potent for me. But it is a species that I greatly admire. I love touching it, I love handling it, I love seeing it. And it's a great indicator of the habitat in my magical mushroom forest that is very conducive to spiritual experiences.
Philosophy arborescens is localized around the Columbia River, north and south. Many other species grow in woodland wood chip habitats. This is Philosophy pelliculosa. Philosophy pelliculosa also co-occurs with a deadly poisonous Galerina marginata group. And if you're colorblind, this is a real challenge, folks, because you need to be able to distinguish between purple-brown spores and rusty-brown spores, and mushrooms which have gills which are rusty in color. And so the color metrics here can be very, very close, so you have to be extremely careful. Another species that looks similar, that grows in pastures, is liberty caps. These are very easy to identify. And this is how I first met Ken Kesey. When I came and met Ken, he said, Paul, I have a confession. I don't know shit about psilocybin mushrooms, but everybody thinks I do, you know? I goes, I know liberty caps, you know? And so Ken and I spent some time and I gave him some general rules and whatnot, but he was just such a caring person, and he was concerned about people's safety. So anyhow, liberty caps and grow around ponds. They grow in pastures, especially with sheep and cows. The sheep is better oftentimes. And they grow in lowland environments where there's sedge grasses. So we'll go in a very short little Psilocybe similancida, liberty cap mushroom.
Throughout the temperate regions of Europe and the Pacific Northwest, one of the most interesting psilocybes to collect is one that grows near ponds in the grass. And this field has not had cows on it for more than 10 years. So cows and sheep can help, but they're not necessary. And this is Psilocybe similanciata, the famed liberty cap. It's exquisite little fruiting here. It's got a translucent striate margin. You can see striations, they're actually the gills showing through the cap. And the cap also has a separable gelatinous pellicle. So here is one over here we can look at. And as you tear the cap, there is a film that's clearly visible. And you can say, oh, that's a really big one. That film stretches and then breaks. So these mushrooms have purple-brown spores, a separable gelatinous pellicle, and they typically have a sharp umbo or a nipple at the very, very top of the cap. And this papilla or nipple is not always in every specimen, but it's quite characteristic of the species in general. So Psilocybe similanciata. Many people, when they pick similanciata, they don't realize that the stem is so long. I think it's a mutualistic species with the rhizomes of grass, almost like a pseudo-mycorrhizal relationship, which means it's not obligatory, but it benefits from it. And the stems often are picked because people don't realize that the stem length is way, way down. So be careful. You always try to get the base of the stem if you can.
So this next one, it just boggles the mind, but it opened up some really big ideas for me. So,
okay, this is July 8th, 2011, and it's just hard to believe that Paul Stamets' boat will be growing a psychoactive mushroom, but it's true. I know it's not the best specimen right now, but this is Gymnoculus luteofolius. It is unique to alder. It's a very rare species. In fact, most mycologists would not be able to identify it. I just happen to have a specialty in this area. And it's so weird because my friend Clay here, hey Clay, he said he found a mushroom going off of a boat and he brought it to me from your friend, right? And it was also Gymnoculus luteofolius. So it begs the question now, is this mushroom indigenous to Northwest boats? And that I've never found this in the wild. I've seen it at a Mycologist Society, but I go figure. Now, I'm not going to pick it, so I guess I'm not breaking the law. Or am I breaking the law because it's growing here and I know what it is? I don't know what to do. Anyhow, how bizarre. Gymnoculus luteofolius on Stamets' boat, and we've got more than one sighting of this on this boat, and more than one boat now, 2 boats. So, go figure.
and now 3 boats on Campbell River, British Columbia. Someone sent me a photograph of Gymnoculus luteofolius growing out of a boat also. So it seems to be spreading the boats or drift logs. I mean, think about that. Logs drifting across the ocean full of mycelium. Ships, when they're broken down from England, could have cyanescence in them. or going to another habitat, and the wood is used to reconstruct, to make a house, or even burn for fire. All these are different vectors that psilocybin mushrooms have cleverly figured out to spread themselves. But so let's get into what is the effects, the benefits potentially of psilocybin mushrooms. I'm going to go through 4 or 5 observational surveys. This is from prisoners, DSHS, 485,000 people surveyed, statistically significant decreased odds of past year larceny, property crime, and violent crime. We look at partner-to-partner violence, 1,266 people surveyed, statistically significant association with reduction of partner-to-partner violence if one of them had taken LSD or psilocybin. For those of you in the dating game, there should be a dating app where, have you tripped on psilocybin? Yes, right. If you haven't, I'm not going to even go close to you. You're too dangerous, right? So, association between classic psychedelics and opioid use. Only psilocybin was associated with a reduction in opioid use. This is so important, folks. Just outside of this theater, I saw opioid addicts. The fentanyl addicts have a stoop. Many of you have seen it. It has affected our communities all over this country, all over the world. It's affected my family, probably many of yours. When you have a family member who is an addict, you don't want to talk about it. Maybe to a counselor, maybe to a religious friend. It's not something you're proud of. I didn't understand why opioid addicts became addicts. I didn't realize that there was pain medication, and that it supplanted their endogenous pain suppressing system by taking this, and so they're literally in pain. But when you take psilocybin, and suddenly the addict is free of addiction. It's a pebble in the pond of positivity. You want to tell your friends, look, this person has changed. They've been reborn. They're no longer an addict. You want to tell your friends, your neighbors, your community. This is paradigm shifting when you think about it. An addict in a recent clinical study described it better than I could have ever come up with. He said every morning he woke up, he felt like he was stuck in a rut. Here I go again. I'm an addict. I'm ashamed. My parents are ashamed. You then medicate yourself more because of the pain and the humility that you feel. But he said after a heroic dose of psilocybin with counseling, when he wakes up, he's no longer stuck in a rut. It's like he said, at the top of a ski slope, every day I felt like I had to go down the same ruts. It's like someone groomed this ski slope. And he's on top of the ski slope saying, great, I'm gonna go over here, over there, go explore. This is phenomenal. And now neurologically, we have really good evidence to support why, and I'll get into that. When we look at the nature of relatedness, many of you know this empirically. I'm not telling you something you don't know. When you take psilocybin mushrooms, you feel more connected to nature. You feel you want a better custodian. You want to take your kids into nature, to teach them the importance of nature. It turns out that psilocybin mushrooms are the most used psychedelic in the United States. In 2023, a RAND report, 8 million Americans, 12% of the population, admitted to using psilocybin mushrooms. That was underreported, I'm sure of that. When you look at clinicaltrials.gov, which I just did yesterday, 253 clinical trials by prestigious universities and institutions doing clinical trials on psilocybin. They go through the IRB boards, institutional review boards with physicians and scientists and ethicists, trying to say, well, is this meritable? Is it addressing a need that's not currently being met? Is it scalable? Is it safe? I mean, those are pretty heavy criteria, and 253 of them are registered at clinicaltrials.gov. David Nutt kind of got excommunicated out of his university for this article. He's a great scientist. Psilocybin mushrooms are in the lowest ranking toxicity of all the drugs, currently being used, the major ones. But look at that, 42 pounds of psilocybin mushrooms to hit the LD50, the lethal dose that will kill 50% of the people. That's 8,000 times a tripping dose, folks. You're gonna dive them indigestion before you're gonna dive into psilocybin. Then Oregon, of course, led the way. Go Oregon for legalizing it. And in Washington State, Bellingham, Olympia, Tacoma, Seattle, it's unanimous votes by the city council, to lower it to the lowest level of as a criminal infraction. So it's the violation of the police officer's duty to office to arrest somebody for psilocybin. You're wasting taxpayers' money. This is a very clever way of lowering, not legalizing, but reducing, the threat of being harassed for possession of psilocybin. So we published a paper, and Dr. Pamela Crisco has a Roots to Thrive nonprofit that she's a co-leader on. And they've done over several hundred people, most end of life, stage 4 diagnoses, 8 people at a time. And they realized that they had in their cohorts, they had people taking pure psilocybin and provided, by the DEA and FDA approved. And they had people taking psilocybin mushrooms. So they did case studies and comparisons. 99% or 98% of the clinical trials at clinicaltrials.gov is psilocybin the molecule. 99% of you out here are psilocybin the mushrooms. It's a giant disconnect between the two. So we published these case reports, and so I jumped ahead here. And I also then popularized a survey for Johns Hopkins, where it was an observational survey, about 3 grams of psilocybin mushrooms. But with people who've taken the psilocybin mushrooms versus the molecule was a fast liftoff, plateaued, fast descent. And they said it felt pharmaceutically, that was one of the phrases, it felt like a pharmaceutical. The people who took the psilocybin mushrooms, it had a slower takeoff. This is what I don't have that chart in there. A slower takeoff, but a long glide down. And they reflected that long glide path down gave them time for reflection and thinking about things, where the molecule was precipitously stopped and they were done. Convenient for the physicians because they have an 8-hour workday. But they said it was much more beneficial to be using psilocybin mushrooms than it was the pharmaceutical molecule. So there is a big disconnect that needs to be addressed. Notably, in this Johns Hopkins observational study, 11% of the people did not benefit, but 30% of the people didn't benefit with the pharmaceutical psilocybin. So that's interesting. But the Johns Hopkins studies, 14 months later, one of them, when they did a retrospective analysis and interview, they found out that those individuals who had a challenging experience, the difficult experience, the difficulty and the after effects of that experience did not extend beyond the experience itself, 14 months later. But the people who had a positive experience, the very act of remembering the experience was therapeutically, measurably beneficial. People think, wow, I could never forgive my father. And I got through that. There was no longer that monkey on their back. Reports like that. So that's really interesting. Psilocybe cubensis is the most consumed psilocybin mushroom in the world. The technique that I developed, that's one flesh floats. All the mushrooms are the same. 1/3, 1/4 of the substrate becomes psilocybin mushrooms. Here is that chart that I put my slide in the wrong place. And this shows the long tail of the naturalistic use. So, but clinical studies, and we have one right now with PMDD, premenstrual dysphoria disorder, which is extraordinarily untreated, literally a disease. And when we have to go through the selection process, we went through like 600 people to get down to 25 because of other cofactors, diabetes, other things that would disqualify them. And talking to these clinicians, I'm going, you're selecting a pool of people that's atypical of the population. because you can't find, people that don't have other issues. It's very hard to find single issues. So this is a problem with clinical trials. But moreover, those people who are coming in for depression and they're told, no, you don't qualify, are you exacerbating their depression? Isn't there a moral responsibility to try to help them because you just elevated their expectation and now you tell them you can't help them? But no one, I think, did this better in describing the enigma or the oxymoron here than Paul Knopf. Moving on. So, excellent studies in treating depression compared to citalopram. And we don't need any more clinical studies on psilocybin treating depression. It's clearly, double-blind placebo control. It's clearly effective. But let's look at other studies that have come out. Yale University, 2 heroic doses of psilocybin. Tobacco addicts, 1 year later, 67% of them are no longer smoking cigarettes. Some of the most addictive substances known to humans. And 2 doses of psilocybin, one patient said, I woke up the next morning, I looked at the cigarettes and going, I don't want that. Well, why am I smoking? And they stopped smoking, just like that. Then, when you're looking at binge drinking, heavy drinking days, also reduction in heavy drinking days. Now, with mood dysfunction in Parkinson's patients, just recently in San Francisco, showing significant improvement in people's not only resolving their depression, but they were also more active, more engaging, and signal and boosting psychomotor skills. We go further and we look at SSRIs and antidepressants are docking with a receptor called TrkB that stimulates BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factors. It turns out that these antidepressants are working because of the stimulation of this neuroreceptor, which codes for newborn neurons. And that docking mechanism gives relief. Well, in this other article, they found that psilocybin docks with TrkB receptors 1,000 times greater affinity than that of these antidepressant medicines. 1,000 times more. So we're in that spectrum between a low dose and a high dose. You're going to have something better than an antidepressant. Now, of course, clinical studies need to be done to prove this, to prove that it's safe. I'm not recommending anything here. And please consult a physician, a qualified medical practitioner, and getting off the antidepressants can be disastrous. But this is a very interesting cellular mechanism. And we discovered in our laboratory when we titrate niacin and psilocin by itself at a microdosing levels, I think about 3 milligrams, there was no activity in binding with TrkB receptors. But we put them together and we had synergy. We had massive increase in the binding affinity when niacin and psilocin were joined together. I had come up with a Stamets stack using psilocybin, niacin, and lion's mane mycelium. And I confess, I named it after myself because I was so tired of people ripping me off. So I said, okay, I'll just tag this, and it became very popular. And so we're using the data that we've mined from a massive survey, microdose.me. We have 25,000 people self-reporting, and the effects of lion's mane have been well demonstrated in regeneration of myelin. I stacked niacin because psilocin is a vasoconstrictor, niacin is a vasodilator. Neuropathies oftentimes present themselves as neuroconstriction and vasoconstriction at the endpoints of the vascular nerve and nervous system, and atrophies. And so deadening of the fingertips and toes. So I thought, well, you get vasodilation of niacin, you can bring the psilocin to the endpoints of the peripheral nervous and vascular system, and maybe they can dock with these receptors that causes new neurons to grow. That was my hypothesis. Well, lion's mane has been extremely well studied. Dean Ornish just published a reduction in progression of Alzheimer's using our lion's mane mycelium. Against the mycelium, it codes for many more active molecules than the fruit bodies. You can see it here. And we believe there's an entourage effect in activating multiple neuroreceptor sites that they begin to crosstalk. But in the microdose.me study, and we published this in Nature, there was one signal that was clearly different. It's not depression or anxiety, which is subjective. I asked, the physicians that were running the study, is there something that's not subjective in our study? Because everybody's criticizing us about expectancy. They said, yeah, we have a tap test. How many times you can tap your 2 fingers in 10 seconds? The researchers and physicians use this for TBI, traumatic brain injury, Alzheimer's, dementia. And typically, except for TBI, you lose the frequency of the cadence of tapping over time, age-related. We're losing that ability of psychomotor skills. And sure enough, we found, and I was blind to this data, we published it in Nature Scientific Reports, that those people doing the Stamets stack in 30 days had a massive increase in their tapping ability, frequency, and cadence compared to psilocin by itself or the baseline people who didn't do anything. Because you can also have a rehearsing effect. So we had to do several days to get rid of that. But clearly something is happening here. Clearly something is happening here. There's not expectancy. Think about people as they age and they fall. Think about people who are a teacher teaching a violin, a piano, a guitar. Think about people trying to keystroke on a computer. Think about all the psychomotor things. Everything that we do is influenced by the health of our nervous system and our neurology. The Bentley Institute sponsored this research showing new neural pathways are activated. Josh Siegel from Washington University with functional MRI observed the birth of dendritic spikes coming from nerves that are otherwise not producing them, but under high dose of psilocybin, they can actually see these dendritic spikes emanate from these nerve endings. And then adjacent nerves, when they produce dendritic spikes and they touch, you have synaptogenesis. You have the ability of rerouting thoughts, motor skills, etc. So the Parkinson's therapy, and this is one of the most debilitating and untreated diseases yet, this is where we're really excited. But psilocybin mushrooms do other things. They also influence our immune system. When you are depressed, you are also immunologically depressed. When you're happier from a psilocybin experience and you broke your addiction, you're more creative, you're more energized, you're engaging people, you upregulate your innate immunity. So psilocybin also affects not only neurology, but your immunity. And indeed, in a double-blind study, they actually were able to demonstrate placebo-controlled and upregulation of immune systems. And there is a bidirectional relationship, well documented, between depression and inflammation, double trouble. And so diseases are associated oftentimes with inflammation or vice versa. So these were sort of the foundational, part of the foundational story for me to come up with something that I think is truly paradigm shifting. But I want to go back in time now. These are parallel paths. And I want to show you my work that led to a discovery against viruses. I published this in, I think, 1999. A whopping 1 page long, all the literature on the antiviral properties of mushrooms. Frank Perano from University of Wisconsin Medical School asked me to get him some gypsy mushrooms when I was like 24 years of age. I collected a whole bunch of gypsy mushrooms, sent it to him. He discovered a new antiviral molecule, RC138, active against herpes viruses. So I was fascinated. Wow, mushrooms could be active against viruses. And Frank was very kind and encouraging. He goes, I think this is a really unexplored territory, Paul. So I started delving into different mushrooms that have been used historically over thousands of years. And I was really gravitated to agarikon. It was first described by Dioscorides in 65 AD in the very first Materia Medica, called Elixirium ad longum vitam, the elixir of long life. Amadou, which my hat is made of, was known as an anti-inflammatory. Hippocrates first mentioned it in 450 BCE. So I was fascinated by these polychrome mushrooms. We have a vast culture collection, hundreds and hundreds of species and strains. And so when 9/11 occurred, the BioShield department one of the physicians saw this article. They contacted me saying, we're really concerned about weaponizable viruses. The BioShield program is several $billion. We're casting a wide net. You've been identified. You've been approved to submit samples. We will do all the laboratory tests for you. That was amazing. We did 2,392 assays. I shotgunned it, folks. I sent them hundreds and hundreds of samples. And out of those hundreds of samples, agarikon was stellar. It reduced the H5N1 virus far better than any antiviral drug. You can Google my name, Stamets, and National Public Radio, the BioShield program, with hits against smallpox that were phenomenal. The top 10 hits of more than 2 million samples were the only natural product. And it's not due to a molecule, it's a natural product. So that was exciting, but those were in vitro results. And then the Russians, at their Fort Detrick called Vector, where they have smallpox, they also published an article. They discovered the same thing. That's good. It validated what I discovered. I couldn't do anything with this. I'm a small mail order business. I can't run a clinical study. I'm not a physician. So that was okay, noteworthy, kind of filed that away. Then I heard about colony collapse with bees. The colony collapse, bees are dying all over the world. And I was growing mushrooms in my garden, and I'm a beekeeper. And one day in July, and I charted it for 40 days, there was a direct convoy of bees from my beehives to my mushroom patch. And I saw the bees move the wood chips, and I could see them sipping on little droplets of the mycelium coming from the mycelium. So I thought that was interesting. I put it in one of my books, Growing Gourmet Medicinal Mushrooms. I forgot about that. But then I heard about the bee virus pandemic. And this is just recently. Look at those numbers. 70 to 100% of beehives died this past year. One bee can pollinate 1,000 flowers a day. That's 1,000 walnuts or cherries, apples, peaches, almonds, etc. Now they only fly for an average of 4 days because the deformed wing virus has weakened their wings. When an infected bee goes to a flower, a honeybee, it leaves viral particles and infects bumblebees, wild bees. The virologists studying bee viruses have not seen a virus-free bee in more than a decade. It is sweeping the planet. This is a bee apocalypse. This is a pandemic out of control. And it turned out the miticides to control the mites, which are vectoring the viruses when they bite the pupae, etc., and it injects the virus. The miticides are now not working. So they've been identified as the big vector. And then we look at the bees, and look at these poor bees. Look at the wings on the one on the left. And look how deformed they are. And here's a healthy bumblebee, and there's one with a deformed wing virus. So we partnered with West State University and the USDA. We did an outdoor clinical study. It's an animal clinical study, randomized, placebo-controlled. And folks, we hit the home run on this one. This was published in Nature Scientific Reports. We're able to reduce the deformed wing virus with Amadou 800 to 1, with one treatment in 10 days. A phenomenal reduction. We're able to reduce it also with reishi, the Lake Sinai virus, more than 45,000 to 1. And so Jay Evans, we reported, there's never seen such antiviral activity in anything ever. This is a huge discovery. And the fact that it's all coming from the mycelium. And that's why I had that original artwork you saw at the beginning, is the mycelium is used in these habitats. I believe bees go to logs for immune benefit. So we tried it then for longevity. We found the reishi mushroom. When they put it into the sugar water to give to bees, it extended their longevity. So we've been on a mission to collect agarikon, because there's going to be a strain of agarikon that's going to be a super strain. So I've dedicated an enormous amount of time, and so many of my employees have been involved in this, finding agarikon and getting it into the culture, banking it, creating extracts and testing it. And now we have the largest collection of agarikon strains in the world. The agarikon grows almost exclusively in the old growth forest. Over 118 strains of agarikon. Those of you who are mushroom hunters, maybe once in a few years you'll find an agarikon. Oftentimes they're so rare. They grow perennially. This one, I love this guy. This is my kind of guy right there. That's more than 100 years old, more than 100 pounds. He had to climb up this tree to get it. And then we also got this one. We don't collect them unless there's being logged or there's been a fire. But these are the fruit bodies, and the biochemistry between the fruit bodies is totally different. It's not only, you should not make fruit body extracts of agarikon, absolutely. It's an endangered species on the red list of extinction in Europe. It's prohibited from being picked. We still have it growing in the old growth forest. But it's a perennial polypore, and the variability here is just phenomenal. It's sustainable to grow the mycelium. So we bank it into liquid nitrogen. Here's some of our 118 strains. But I'm going to give a short history lesson on mycodiversity, the importance of having a variety of strains, a bank of them. Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin and Penicillium chrysogenum, but it was Mary Hunt's cantaloupe. And it was Mary Hunt's cantaloupe, the golden rotted cantaloupe from a food market in Peoria, Illinois, that was able to create a strain of penicillium that produced more than 200 times the amount of penicillin previously known. And this allowed for industrialization of penicillin where the Germans and the Japanese did not have it, but we did. We also had corn steeped liquor. We had corn growing, so we could do batch fermentation. This saved literally millions of lives and was a factor for winning World War II. So I talk about the mycodiversity, I talk about viral pandemics, and we all know about COVID. COVID swept the world. The virologists that I've been in contact with did not see it coming. They thought bird flu would be the next big pandemic, still do. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm privy to a lot of information. I'm more of a conspiracy theorist now than I was then. COVID escaped. There's no doubt about it. Whether it was a genetically engineered virus or whether it was obtained from nature, altered and then released. But the fact is, this virus should not have become a pandemic. There's dark forces out there, folks. So because of my research, and I published in Nature Science, scientific reports on reduction viruses in bees, physicians who are at the front line of the COVID pandemic got a hold of me and said, Paul, we heard you about your bioshield work against bird flu and smallpox. We saw the article in Nature Scientific Reports. Maybe your mycelial extracts could help fight COVID. So we got approved by the FDA. And I'm here to report on 2 highly successful, double-blind, placebo-controlled COVID studies using agarikon and turkey tail mycelium. This is 90 people. It's a phase 1, phase 2, substantial group. We use turkey tail because we know that turkey tail is safe. And again, the fruit body extracts, turkey tail, can have algae on it and all sorts of bacteria. And so it's highly variable when you do the fruit body extracts, but moreover, we found that the mycelium is far more potent. And my mother, many of you know, we have a breast cancer clinical study, double-blind placebo-controlled, and I personally gave my mother turkey tail mycelium, which I believe extended her life more than 10 years. So because of the turkey tail research in agarikon, we developed a protocol for this COVID study. But the FDA said, whoa, wait a second. Most people die from COVID from a cytokine storm, an overstimulation of the immune system. You folks want to stimulate the immune system in COVID patients, you can precipitate a cytokine storm. Fortunately, we published an article in the Journal of Inflammation Research which showed the fermented mycelium on rice stimulates the production of interleukin-10 and interleukin-1RA, 2 anti-inflammatory cytokines. Most cytokines are inflammatory. These are anti-inflammatory cytokines. Whereas the mycelium, the fruit flies did nothing, and the mycelium by itself it did very, very little. But when you put it on rice, it's like, you know, milk with acidophilus or lactobacillus becomes yogurt. So it's a fermented substrate. So the fermented substrate of the mycelium of turkey tail excited these anti-inflammatory cytokines. So we published this. So we're able to convince the FDA that we're likely not to create a cytokine storm. These are immunomodulation effects. We combine both the agaricon and turkey tail together because of the thousands of years of use, we might be able to have a positive effect. This is now in the finer steps of peer review for publication, soon to be published, but I'm happy to report on the 2 clinical studies now. The first study is enhancing the vaccines. Most of us have mRNA vaccines from Moderna or Pfizer. I'm not really love getting a vaccine. I think it's the pharmaceutical company, exploiting the vulnerability of the population. I do think some vaccines are important, but I'm not in the vaccine of the month club. So the problem with the vaccines, that many people know, if you know, that by day 2 or 3, you feel like you're hit by a truck. You have headaches, you're nausea, you don't want to get out of bed, you don't want to go to school, you don't want to take care of your kids, you miss work. Well, we found double-blind, placebo-controlled, the individuals who took agaricon and turkey tail here versus the placebo, which is just rice, they had a massive, the 10 most significant adverse symptoms identified by the CDC. There it is on day 3. It peaks. You feel like shit. And people who take the agaricon and turkey tail, again, double-blind, placebo-controlled, had no visibility into this, had massively reduction of the adverse side effects. So statistically significant. This is only over 5 days. So reduction of vaccine negative effects. 30% of Americans don't get vaccines due to fear of these effects. So it's called vaccine hesitancy. I may know I should get a vaccine, but I don't want to miss work. I think I'll take the risk. But the thing that was most surprising, and I claim no credit for this, the fellow researchers came up with this idea. They brought back people 6 months later after a 5-day exposure, and they found nearly a tripling of the antibody reserves that were resident within their immune system. They had a memory of the antigens to be able to produce the antigens to combat future COVID infections. This is extraordinary. 5 days of a nutraceutical to have such a long antibody reserve effect for the receptor binding domain. So significant, and they had no cytokine storm. But here's the data that I'm most excited about. This has not been published. This will be published in about 2 or 3 months. I do have permission to be able to share it with you. This is with a cohort of individuals before the vaccines were widely available. They came into the hospital, the doctor's office. They had severe COVID. They were enlisted. Do you want to partake in a clinical study using mushrooms? First I asked them, do you like mushrooms, by the way? They want to get rid of the bias effect. So, and then high recruitment. And so the individuals that took agaricon and turkey tail lived at shortness of breath, 0.0, this is one chance in 1,000 that this is just random. Sore throat, we actually had 4 zeros, so this is way, way less than that. Stuffy nose, runny nose, and loss of taste. When you are phlegming and you have a runny nose and you're sneezing, you're coughing, you're aspirating virions, viral particles. If you can stop people from sneezing and producing all this phlegm, you can stop the vector of transmission. This is huge, folks. This is huge. That you can use a natural product in combination with conventional medicine, call it a vaccine if you wish, but the fact that you can ameliorate or reduce the vectors of transmission by reducing sneezing and coughing and producing a phlegm, besides muscle ache and headache and everything else that you benefit from, this is a game changer. Now, it's thought to be an oxymoron. If you stimulate the immune system, then oftentimes this is related to inflammation. You cut yourself. The cut becomes inflamed. That's your immune system. But when you get a viral infection, it's throughout your entire body. It localizes oftentimes in the lungs. And so your viral infection is in the inflammatory response of your immune system is what kills the COVID patients. So I present to you the 6 primary symptoms of COVID-19, and here's the 6 primary symptoms of H5N1, which has up to a 70% mortality rate within 1 to 2 weeks. Think of that. COVID was less than 1%. There is a bird flu pandemic coming. The birds are migrating now. It's spread not only to birds, to swine, to hogs, to pigs, to cows, to eagles, to seals, sea lions. We're involved in a massive viral pandemic as I speak. This is an example of factory farming. Too many animals in too tight of a location. Drinking water frequented by wild birds. 20% of workers in cattle farms and dairies that have been infected are sick and not being tested. This is a huge potential threat to us. And what have we learned? Vaccinated or not, agar-agar and turkey tail can alleviate symptoms. It supports, I believe, innate immunity. It elevates your endogenous immune systems, not due to one molecule. It's due to exciting multiple receptors in the immune system that crosstalk, that it elevates innate immunity so your endogenous immune system can express antibodies to prevent infection. All habitats are infused with mycelium. We walk on mycelial membranes and landscapes. And throughout time immemorial, we've been fighting diseases. But our ancestors who were mycologically literate knew the power of mushrooms and the power of mycelium. And it dawned on me during one of my heroic doses on psilocybin. Since the mycelium permeates all habitats and these are thin, fine fibers, when there's a lightning strike in the distance and the thunder roars, wouldn't the mycelium awaken to the impending rain? Of course it would. It opened up its receptors to absorb the water. But then I thought, well, wait, it's not just thunder, it's drum circles. People drumming to celebrate a child's birth, a wedding, a harvest in community, a Provende Alliance of collected souls celebrating together the importance of regenerative agriculture and being in touch and respecting nature. The mycelium is listening. Psilocybin mushrooms have made me a more intelligent person. I believe psilocybin mushrooms make nicer people. I believe we have a crisis of creativity. The fact that I can make these discoveries using mycelial networks is born from my psilocybin experiences of communing with nature and understanding that we are one with this vast, giant intelligence that surrounds us. This is our time, folks. This is time for us to take back our destiny. This is a time for us to unify as a community. This is our time for us to support the Provende Alliance, to give our respects to the Keezies, to the hippies who had it right, to the indigenous peoples who had it right. This is a revolution for the freedom of consciousness. These are genius molecules that are within these psilocybin mushrooms at a time critical that we need to stand up as a community and come together to share our ideas. Nature respects us if we respect nature. I want to thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you very much.